Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into the ArtGibbs Sports Business Podcast. Here we are just a few days away from Super Bowl Sunday. And in this episode, we're going to talk about why a quarterback wanting to make it to the Super Bowl might have to throw a little more than footballs to the rest of their team. All right, so the Super Bowl is just around the corner, and it's probably the biggest sporting event, commercial sporting event that exists. Of course, we all hear about the $4 to $5 million for 30-second advertisement and all of that kind of stuff that goes along with the Super Bowl. It has some of the highest ratings of any TV program, probably the highest ratings in all of TV. It hovers just under 50, which, of course, ratings is basically the percent of households in an area that watch a given event. So, a 7 would be 7% roughly. And the Super Bowl, of course, is between 25 and 50. It's very close to 50, which is really off the charts. Of course, viewership is something like 100 million or more than 100 million people. It's effectively a national holiday. We all hear about the crazy advertisement costs, $4 to $5 million for a 30-second ad. And again, obviously, that's based on and because of the ratings. It is the top sporting event. And so that's upon us. And of course, we've got the Kansas City Chiefs facing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, two teams that are really going to benefit from being in the Super Bowl financially. They're kind of, smaller market teams. The value of the teams is down in the 20s out of the 30 NFL teams. And so the Super Bowl notoriety, the Super Bowl merchandising will have a large effect on those teams. Now, of course, the two quarterbacks facing each other are Tom Brady and Patrick Mahomes. Now, of course, Tom Brady's been to the Super Bowl. This is his 10th appearance. And Patrick Mahomes, it's his second. Of course, he won last year. He's kind of the new kid on the block, if you will. Now, one thing that's interesting about both of these quarterbacks is that they're both actually paid below market. Quarterback is the most important position in the NFL, and yet these two quarterbacks are in the Super Bowl, are probably the two biggest quarterback names in the NFL, and are paid below market. Now, of course, there's a reason for this. It's a salary cap league. Now, the NFL has a 53-man roster, and effectively the salary cap based on the collective bargaining agreement is something like just under 50% of the TV deal. And the TV deal is massive. We know it's something like $5 to $7 billion per year, and that's divided up by the NFL teams, and then that represents the salary cap for that 53-man roster. Now, we all know about inflation, and inflation is something that's especially prevalent in the NFL. The TV contract, of course, every time it's renegotiated, it goes up. The ratings throughout the NFL are really incredibly high. So as the TV contract goes up, the salary cap goes up. Now, there'd be a temporary hit with COVID this year, but most likely, this new deal, the next deal, will be much, much bigger than the previous one. There's estimates that it'll be something like $15 billion. So over the next 3 to 4 years, the salary cap could get very close to doubling. Now, of course, the quarterback is usually the highest paid player on the team and usually represents a very large percentage of the salary cap. Now, the less a quarterback gets, the more other players can get. And by percentage, say a quarterback gets 10% less, that's going to be very big for the rest of the team because the quarterback's salary is generally so high. So 10% of that can go and fill in a lot of other positions on the roster or upgrade a lot of positions on the roster. Now, of course, Patrick Mahomes signed the 10-year, $500 million contract. It's a very large number. Everybody talks about, how many Lamborghinis he can buy with the contract and all this ridiculous stuff, but the contract's 10 years. So it's $50 million a year average, 10 years. It's a lot of money, obviously, but in this salary cap league where within 4 to 5 years you could be looking at a double, the top quarterback will probably be approaching, $60 million, $65 million in some cases per year. But Patrick Mahomes will be at the 50. He'll be at the 50 in 2022. He'll be at the 50 in 2024. He'll be at the 50 at 2027, and so on. Now, Tom Brady, on the other hand, he signed a 2-year, $50 million deal total with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He's potentially past his prime, but here they are in the Super Bowl, and that's $25 million a year. And of course, Tom Brady in his time at the Patriots was known to take less than top dollar. And that, of course, gave the Patriots the ability to get other players on the roster, enhance the roster. And as we see, and this is not a unique take, many people have mentioned this, but as you see these quarterbacks that sign these blockbuster deals, generally they don't make it to the Super Bowl. So much of the salary cap is tied up in that player's contract that they don't make it to the Super Bowl. They don't have the basically financial capital, financial firepower to put top players around them, and then they don't make it to the Super Bowl. Now, of course, players like Patrick Mahomes, players like Tom Brady that take less, potentially, there's a trade-off. If they take less but they make it to the Super Bowl, if they take less but they have better weapons around them, and then they have better stats, better win-loss, et cetera, more passing yards, and then they make it to the Super Bowl or they get high up in the MVP discussion, that helps them in other ways. It helps them in off-the-field sponsorships, et cetera. But here we are. We've got these two quarterbacks, Tom Brady, notorious for taking less money, Patrick Mahomes, potentially sort of Tom Brady's heir, the next, the protege, if you will. He takes less. Now, he signed a $500 million contract, and the number seems very big, but it's a 10-year deal. And most of these other contracts, you see they're shorter deals. Apparently, that's what we heard with Dak Prescott at the Dallas Cowboys. The agent wanted a shorter term deal, and the idea was that the salary cap was going to go up, and that was the reasoning for doing these shorter term deals. So although Patrick Mahomes' deal looks blockbuster, it's long term, and with inflation, so we've got inflation in everything, regular inflation, maybe in everything but a Netflix subscription. Any assets and those kinds of things are really inflating a lot. The government's handing out stimulus checks, etc. So let's talk a little bit about the franchises and kind of their value. Again, we've referenced it before. We've got some more detail on why and how these things happen in previous podcasts that I'll post below. But just as an example, let's take the New England Patriots, which have done fantastically well. They were purchased for $173 million 27 years ago. Now they're estimated to be worth about $4.5 billion, which is, that's looking at, 12.5% kind of compounded, which is bigger than, obviously beats the S&P and all that kind of stuff. But that $4.4 billion is probably low. If it were to sell, it'd probably break that number. And additionally, that does not include any of the money taken out. So all of the money taken out, which again, for the New England Patriots is approaching $250 million per year that can be taken out. And that's sort of pre-tax money, and probably it's more like half of that. But let's say it's half of that, or even a little bit less, 80 million a year, that kind of number. So there's 80 million, 100 million able to be taken out each year. And also the value of the franchise is rising to the tune of 13% a year. And as we mentioned, there's also a depreciation that can be taken on the value of that franchise. Part of what makes these franchises rise, there's a couple different factors. One is the gatekeeping. There's a set number of franchises. The franchises as a group would have to decide if they wanted to have another franchise come in. They would all have to decide and all have to vote on that. And if they did, they would get a franchise expansion fee from that new team, a very large fee, which would be divided up by the teams that already were there. And if they don't want to do the expansion, then they don't have to. And there's a set number of franchises. And those set number of franchises then as a group negotiate these TV deals, etc., and as a whole represent the NFL. So that's a big piece of it. Obviously, the product is something that people love. The TV deals are very lucrative because the TV numbers are very lucrative. But additionally, beyond this set number and this great product and all these kinds of things, it's a salary cap league. So the labor number is fixed, and it's fixed at half of this TV deal. So the team, it knows what its labor costs are going to be, and it knows that it's got the other half of the revenue from the TV deal combined with all of the game day revenue, merchandising, etc. Now, of course, it costs money to run a team. It costs money to have a stadium and a stadium lease and all that kind of stuff. But the biggest cost, labor, is fixed. And it's fixed in relation to what's received from these TV contracts. So the franchises and the NFL owners know basically that they're not going to get into a position where there's a bidding war between the teams, the labor costs rise, making those teams much less profitable as the teams try to win. Now, in a podcast that we've got coming up, we're going to talk a little bit about baseball and about how that's actually very different in baseball. And there's franchises that don't do that well on the field that actually do very well financially. And it is partly related to this labor cost situation. But alas, in the NFL, it is a salary cap league and there is a fixed labor cost. So when the quarterback's the highest paid player, the largest percentage of the salary cap, sometimes up over 30%, when they take a pay cut, that opens up a very large nominal amount of money that can be used and spread across the rest of the roster. And the idea would be that it would be able to enhance the rest of the roster and make the team much better. Now, if the quarterback takes the full amount that they can get, then that makes the rest of the roster a little bit tighter. Because again, you've got 53 players, you've got this 53-man roster that's going to get a certain amount of money. And if one player is getting 30% of it versus, say, one player taking a bit of a pay cut and getting 27% of it, of that entire amount of money, that has a big effect because you've got to pay 52 other players. So if the quarterback is willing to take this pay cut and willing to take it over a long period of time, that allows you much more flexibility on the rest of the roster. And these two quarterbacks that are about to face each other in the Super Bowl, probably the most highly recognized, most notable quarterbacks around, both have made that a career decision to take less, to enhance the roster around, and to play in the Super Bowl. Thank you for listening. We really appreciate it. Enjoy the Super Bowl. Have some nachos. And we've got a great guest coming up on our next podcast that should release around Tuesday, I believe. A great interview there. So be looking for that. And we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for joining us.